Hi, welcome to the Edge of Change podcast. I'm Lou Roby, and today we're going to be joined by Helen MacPhee from AstraZeneca. But first, a word from our sponsor, Annette from Marlowe Consulting.
It's wonderful to be here and so excited to sponsor this series of podcasts. It's our first foray into this type of thing, so it's great to be here.
Would you like to tell our listeners just a little bit about Marlowe Consulting?
Yes, of course. So we are a specialist business change consultancy, really focusing on helping the people in organisations through change. So we'll work with organisations to think about how do you get your leadership, your business change management, your communications and your change capability up to scratch so that you can help people from how they're working today to how they will need to work in future.
Tell us, how do we find Marlowe Consulting? Because I believe you're celebrating a bit of a milestone birthday.
We are in our 10th year,
Yay.
which is quite an achievement, I think, in the consultancy world. So you can find us, obviously, we have a website, www.marloweconsulting.com. Marlowe has an E on the end. Or people are very welcome to email me, annette@marloweconsulting.com.
But let's get into this podcast because Helen leads a multi-billion-dollar initiative at AstraZeneca and has been looking at transformation and leading transformation along global financial services for over 20 years. I'm really interested to hear her insights and all her hard-hitting tips of what she's done to approach leadership, stakeholder engagement, and much more. Let's go and have a listen. Welcome, Helen. We're absolutely delighted to have you here today. Thank you.
Real pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Well, we've been very excited, and I know you're joined here by Annette Andreasen. Hi, how are you?
I'm really good, thanks. Lovely to be here. And thank you, Helen, as well, for joining us. Really good to have you here.
Great to be invited.
And it's a sunny day.
Yeah, I know. Aren't we lucky?
Yeah, I can feel it on my back. It's great.
So we're going to apologise up front if any of the air conditioning comes up over the mic, because obviously that wasn't planned. But thanks again for being here. I know we're here to talk about transformation today and how you've been doing quite a lot of work in that area. And what would be really fascinating, I think, for our listeners is to tell us how you make transformation happen.
Well, it's a very subtle sense of understanding why you need to do it in the first place. I never like being given an opportunity or a challenge that I don't understand why. Why does anybody want it? Why is this going to be a good thing?
Yeah.
Either for the individuals or for the organisation. And if I can't understand that, I won't take it on. And I think that is really what helps you determine how to approach it. Because quite often when you're looking at transformation, you're actually affecting other people, not yourself so much, other people. And you have to understand why it's going to be good for them, why they're going to benefit from it, why are they going to feel energized by it, whatever the need is, without sounding patronizing, without sounding schoolmarmish about it. Really, really understand the genesis for the need. Mm-hmm. And once you've done that, I think then the conversation changes. You almost sit in their shoes. You go to their side of the table, and you really can then empathise in a proper sense, an operational sense, in a personal sense, what it means to go through that transformation. And that's something I've always very strongly believed and still do today.
Transformation always has a cost for a business, for individuals going through it. You know, we know change is quite fatiguing at times for people. So I think that starting with why and is so important. And I think where I've seen you operate so well, Helen, is around the really senior stakeholders. I think you operate well at all levels, but you are a past master, I think, at bringing really senior stakeholders on board and understanding how to get them to put that effort in to really invest in the why. How do you go about that? What are some of your top tips for engaging some of those really senior levels?
Well, thank you, first of all, for the compliment. I guess, again, I don't like to look at my senior colleagues or my elders and betters, whatever you want to call them, as inhuman. They too have an agenda. They too have a purpose. They too have a private life, a public life, a work agenda. And I want to make sure I'm relevant. And so for me, the critical thing is should I be engaging with them? And if not, leave them alone. You don't have to go and wave your flag, leave them alone. But for those who you're going to add either complexity or change or hopefully lots of benefits, you do need to treat them as you would any member of the team and go back to the why and help them see that where they can add real value to this opportunity you're giving them comes from their engagement and their support. And it's true, everybody provides that in a very different way. So some of my senior executive will be the people I ring and sort of tear my hair out and go, oh, what do I do? And they'll be there counselling. And others I need to encourage to remember why it's important and make sure that they get the benefits of it. And others have very bluntly said to me, am I going to be impacted? And I've had to say, no, we're spending a lot of money, but as long as you're okay with that and you need an update from time to time, I'm here for you. Thank you. And so it's not trying to be all things to all people and to pick your style for each of the individuals. Treat them as humans.
And how do you go about setting about, that engagement around the stakeholder management, really getting to understand? Because I think a lot of the time on projects, people go, who are the stakeholders? We have an assessment of, well, it might be somebody over there and a couple of people over there, but actually, how do you go about really assessing who the stakeholders are?
It's one of those old-fashioned tricks I learned as a consultant, actually.
Right.
Many years ago. It's almost like a network map, thinking through, who does he talk to? Who does she talk to? What do they think? How are they going to influence? And there was a lovely tool that I was given as a young consultant with a little matrix. You've got to have a consultant matrix, haven't you?
Absolutely.
With think, feel, say, do. And it's so basic and lots of people know it, but so few people actually ever stop and draw the matrix and go, okay, when I leave this meeting, what do I want this person thinking? What do I want this person saying? What I want them doing? And what do I want them feeling? And quite often you give someone an action. It's not the same thing.
Yeah.
And so making sure that they have that. Now, that helps me in my earlier interactions understand whether they are truly a stakeholder or just somebody who's nosy, or somebody who somebody else thought was a stakeholder, and you kind of get that engagement with them, and then you can talk it through and understand. And then I think after that, it always goes back to that why.
Yes.
What motivates us to get up in the morning and do what we do, and no human is different. You've just got to look for that why. And I think with the stakeholders, typically, I hate the word. It is it's become overused. I think when it was first invented, it was clever, but now I feel it does have a sort of a straitjacket around it. It's who are the people in the organisation you're fortunate to be part of that are going to help make this journey and make this delivery successful.
And then I think on the flip side, you've got those people in the organisation who will be impacted by what's coming down the line to them. And I think you're right, the stakeholder word seems so impersonal.
Yeah.
It's a bit like when you talk about human resources, isn't it?
Yes.
It's probably something I shouldn't say out loud, but it's about people.
Yes.
And how do you help people through that particular journey if they are impacted? And for me, leadership's so important in that, of making sure that those senior people that you are talking to not only understand it and are willing to invest from a financial perspective, they've got to invest from a time perspective to lead their people through that journey.
Absolutely.
And I just wonder, Helen, is that something that you've had challenges with in the past of getting them to role model and lead, or have you got any thoughts on how you put people into that sort of position?
Well, first of all, I empathise hugely with your point around HR. I was once told that business lost the way when they stopped calling it personnel and started calling it HR, because none of us want to be seen as a human resource, do we? But I think to go back to your question, I think really good leaders, and you obviously got to find the good leaders. You're not going to create a leader through a transformation necessarily. Sometimes you have to find the diamonds out there already. If you can really inspire them by the vision of what you're trying to do, I find typically people are quite willing to give their energy and their time, because actually really good leaders enjoy it. They get energy from it. They get sense of achievement from it. And I think that is what you try and tap into, the people who really do have a sense of wanting to make that change, and they perhaps just need a bit of help and direction and support. And sometimes it's as simple as materials and stories and things like that help. You've got very bright people who are not very good at telling a story.
Yeah,
Help
I
them.
think, I mean, I have to say, and I probably would say this, wouldn't I, having been at the BBC for 25 years, but previously, but we had and I'll just share this because I think it really sings to your point, that I had somebody come join my team a few years ago who had been in journalism for a long time in the newsroom. And we made some really horrific cuts in the newsroom, and fast. And 4 years on, when he came to work for me, he was really upset and angry at the fact that he didn't understand the why. And to the point that he felt that he had derailed some of the necessary transformation in the BBC, and was actually furious at the fact that he wasn't really explained to in terms of the why, the vision, the purpose. And he said, I just would never have gone on strike. I mean, I seriously, and I probably wouldn't have rallied other people to go on strike. And that, for me, really hit me hard, because I just thought, we rely, don't we? And we'll get into this, how we rely on our influencing later. But that sense of how do you really bring people with you, because you're sitting where you're sitting, because that's your head of transformation. You can see where we've got to go. You've been party to so many conversations that generally most others haven't. And here we are, suddenly I come into work and you're all telling me all these things that might even be a surprise. Yeah. And I think just remembering that sort of, where are they? You exactly what you said at the beginning of this podcast, which I loved, which was, where are they? Who are they? What do they need to know? How am I going to bring them with me? What is it I need to tell them? How do I need to inspire them? I love that, because I think that most of the time we're so focused on, we've just got to go and save £8 million. So, right, that's what I'm going to go and tell them. But actually, that's only really a small part of the much bigger story.
And I think one of the things I always reflect on is that outside of your working life, most of us act as grown-ups most of the time, right? So we have families, we have dependencies, we have all sorts of grown-up responsibilities that we're perfectly capable of doing. Why do we assume that ability to take responsibility for something, or that grown-up behaviour, leaves when you put the work badge on in the morning or you walk through the door? It doesn't. And so if you stop treating people as humans and then as adults, they start going, well, tell me about it then, because they will step back. I want people to arrive in the morning to be an adult and help me on the journey, not to be waiting for direction. And so again, really making sure they understand the why. They'll get on and do it themselves. One of my favourite bosses of all time once said to me, imagine if the person who runs the football club at the weekend, or imagine if the person who helps their children with their homework, or imagine, he gave a long list, came to work every morning to do that level of good for our company.
Yeah.
What a great place it would be. And I thought, yeah, that's so true. Why do we assume that our power out of work should be turned off when we walk through the building? And that it's capturing that and allowing people to be, it is this horrible phrase, be the best they can be. I mean, again, it's become a consultant speak, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that's kind of what's underneath it.
Yeah, some great scenes in Ted Lasso, actually.
Oh, I love Ted Lasso.
Don't we all love? I'd really love to go and make all the cutaways for that for all our training, wouldn't you?
We have dug through it once or twice to pick out particular bits of training.
There's a lot of money sitting there, Annette.
Yes, yeah, there is. I think the piece, we were talking actually just before we came online, weren't we, about empathy? And I think that's so hugely important. It's putting yourselves in the shoes of the people that you're trying to engage and communicate with, whether they are at the very most senior level in the organisation or absolutely, at the coalface, doing the doing, whether that's in a newsroom, whether that's in a manufacturing facility. There's a quite useful tool called an empathy map, actually, which a little bit plays what you were saying, but more looking at what someone heard so far today. What might they think about it? How might they be feeling about what they've heard so far? And there's actually some research that shows that leaders generally assume that people lower than them know more about what's going on than they actually do.
For sure.
So I think that's so important. And I just wondered if you've got any reflections on how to engage at those different levels and how to get the messaging right at different levels in the organisation, because that's critical of thinking those who can influence, but also those who are impacted.
Correct. I mean, and it was a bit what you said earlier. Don't start the conversation halfway through. Don't assume that people have heard the first bit.
Yeah,
is one tip I would really just remind people why you're there. Secondly, remember that they've just come from something else, and their first couple of minutes is trying to remember your name and why the hell you're sitting in front of them. And so don't just leap in with the story straight away, because they won't be focusing on you for the first couple of minutes. Just give them a bit of space. And it's just chat, idle chat. For the first couple of minutes, makes everybody in the room, makes, oh, yes, I remember this. And then you go into it. But then do remember to repeat the story. And that old adage, you have to say things 7 times, but people remember it. Absolutely right. And, you can always say to people, look, stop me if I'm telling you things you remember or already know.
Yeah.
But almost no one does.
Mm-hmm.
And then actually also, I think, give permission to listen very hard to yourself and to the people around you. So one of the huge opportunities and benefits I've had in my career is a very international forum. And I've found that they always want you to stand on the stage and talk. So you do. But actually the best session is when they start asking you the questions, because that's when you learn. And I've always found
they are. Yeah.
How interested they are, but also the angle they're coming at.
Yeah.
And I've always been very fortunate in all the different locations that I've run. I've found 1 or 2 kind of people in the audience. I go, you always ask me difficult questions. Go on, what's the question this time? And they always rise to it. And they always come up with the most horrible questions. But that's good, because it shows that you're willing to take them on. And sometimes you have to say, you know what, that's a brilliant question. I've never thought about it. I'll come back to you.
Yeah.
But not often. It goes back to, you've had all the conversations, you've had all the detail. They've not seen it. And they're asking the one question that was still in the back of their mind. And by showing that you're prepared to answer it, I think it really just helps bridge that trust. We'll probably end up using the trust word again, but at the end of the day, if the people you're communicating with don't trust you and don't trust what you're saying, that isn't going to land. So you have to give them the opportunity to talk to you and to listen really hard.
And trust is hugely important in any sort of change, let alone transformational change, isn't it? Because if people don't trust their leadership, if you're going into a situation where they're already perhaps a little bit cynical, a bit suspicious, you've got to do a lot of work to build that trust. And the only way to do that is through listening and engaging.
I really agree on that. And I think sometimes we have to invest far more time than we ever think about to the word listening. And certainly recently, it's a few years ago now, but I actually spent 3 months just listening before we decided on anything, before we even came up with the plan. And I think that we don't give enough over actually to deep listening and allowing people to, there was a wonderful woman, I don't know if you've come across her in your time, and unfortunately she lost her life to COVID, but she was the most phenomenal organisational development female woman I've ever met. Her name was Mian Young Chong. You haven't heard of her? No, Mian Young. But she worked with us at the BBC. I think I can safely say she worked with us for over 15 years through many director generals. And forgive me, because this is her, I am quoting her, what I'm about to say next. But she would just say to me, Lou, when you're running these change programs, it's really simple. You let everyone come in. And her word was, you let everyone come in and vomit. Which I hated. I really hate that word. But what she meant by that was just let them come in and chuck up and tell you everything that's on their mind, and just listen. Don't open your mouth. You've got 2 ears, 1 mouth. Don't open it. Just let them vent. And it was such wise words, because most of the time, once people felt that they've got what they wanted off their chest, right, they're like,
Absolutely.
okay, so what are you actually going to do then?
Yeah.
What do we have to do? How are we going to do it? And what plan have you got? So
I must have met her in a former life because we had a vomit on the table. It was very exactly. So, and it's just getting it off the chest. But also, there'll always be a nugget of something in there you've missed. You need to deal with.
Yeah.
You need to think through. It's just not random. I mean, it's absolutely critical.
I'm curious. A lot of, I think, people are stepping up into maybe a transformation director or even a program director role for the first time. If they've come with that project management, program manager route, tend to be quite focused on, really good things like the plans, your RAID logs, getting the delivery done. How much of your time do you roughly think is spent on that engagement piece versus maybe the doing of running a program?
Personally, in my current role, 80-20.
80% engagement, 20 running the program.
And the engagement is everywhere, not just outside the program, but also inside the program. So, as you will know, I have deep dives with all of the extended leadership team, and they're not exclusive if people want to join, but I give them 90 minutes roughly every couple of weeks, depending on diaries, just to talk me through what they're doing. And there's two purposes to that. One is for me to learn and know enough to be dangerous. But secondly, to allow them to vent what's on their minds and what they're worried about. And they tend to get, more animated as the meeting goes on. And then at the end of it, I go, right, is there anything else you wanted to raise? And there's always something, and they always share it. And then they'll be, okay, what do you want from me? What can I do? And sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes it's, okay, I just need you to know and agree with the direction I'm going. It doesn't matter what the ask is. And when I start working with people, they always sort of start with an agenda and quite formality, and they produce slides. And I'm like, okay, that's absolutely fine if it works for you. I'm very adaptable. I can certainly work with that. But if you'd rather turn up, put your feet on the table and just talk to me, I'm completely fine with that as well. So this meeting has to be run in your style. Mm-hmm. And of course, what people share then, by the way they turn up, is a whole load about them that they hadn't realised they were sharing, which helps me manage them better, I hope, because you understand what their style is. So if somebody is quite formal, you don't IM them in the middle of a meeting and sort of say, can we just talk about this? Because that will, that's not how they think. Yeah. That's not how they work. That's not their best way forward. Others like turning up.
But I think meeting people where they are is really interesting, because I had to move the one show once, and I would never do it again. But I had to move the one show from really what was the most perfect place to ever be in life to suddenly into a totally shared environment. So you can imagine how that was going to go. And I just remember walking into the editor's office, and he was literally, I promise you this, he was just laying down on the floor, looking at the ceiling. And I just stood there in the room thinking, now what do I do? And I knew he didn't want to see me. I mean, he certainly didn't want to hear me. And I thought, well, if you can't beat them, join them.
So you lay alongside him.
So I went and lay down on the floor. And he sort of looked over and he said, what are you doing? I said, I don't know. I was just following you. So then he sat up, I sat up, and as they say, the rest is history. And they now are, in West One. But I tell that story as well because I think your point about you have to meet people where they are, and sometimes you have to do the craziest of things, which I did. It's really important actually, because we're not all the same, and we don't all receive information in the same way. We're not, to your point, we're not where we are, where we should be, or where you think we should be, just because you've decided to tell me this thing that I am where I am. So I think these are all really valid, really interesting and valid points, and actually the fact that we are all totally different. And also what we haven't really got into, but you mentioned in the podcast about being able to work all over the world, then clearly that we're not just talking about, we're here in the UK recording, but obviously this could hopefully go out globally, but culturally that there are many different cultures, and how have you dealt with that? Because I'm sure there's some cultures where going into a very man's world in some areas of business where women really aren't considered shouldn't even be in the office. How does that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, I happen to be one of life's very curious people. So the whole opportunity and I see it as a total and utter privilege to have been able to go around the world and meet people in their environment and work with them, is nothing short of an absolute pleasure. So that is how I'm wired. It comes from my parents. I've passed it on to my sons. It's just part of our makeup. So I just love it. So I will go and just be curious and ask lots of questions. And it can be the taxi driver on the way in from the airport. It can be the staff at the hotel, or it can be the employees of where we're working or whatever. It's just, I've always tended to have read about the country as well before I go a little bit. And for many years, when I used to travel, I used to send a metaphorical postcard back to the rest of the organisation that I was leading about where I'd been, with a picture and a stamp that was relevant for the country, and just sharing what I'd seen and the people I'd met. And it was a way of giving a name check to the people I'd met. So they loved it. But actually, there was always at least 2 facts I could throw into that postcard.
Brilliant.
Really? I had no idea. Well, because I had no idea either. So if I find it interesting, I'm sure everyone else will, And so I used to do that. And so I'm very lucky that it's something that I genuinely get pleasure from. So it's not hard work for me. So going out and listening and talking. And one of my favourite ever meetings, and I hope maybe the ladies who are part of it will remember it. We were out in India, and I was asked to meet with, 2 particular occasions with the women. And I said, I'd like to get to know some of the women. They said, right, we'll organise a proper meeting. So we did. And honestly, within 10 minutes, the hilarious laughter and the giggling and the stories we were exchanging, which were most inappropriate at times. And of course, the more someone spoke, someone else spoke up, and then I spoke up, and then I'd give my perspective, which is completely different, of course. So when I came out, we had such laugh. We all had tears running in our faces. We hadn't talked work at all. We've been talking about goodness knows what, home lives and housework and families and the dynamics and looking after, we talked about all sorts of things. And we left, and I was approached by the head of the site, who came up to me and he said, "What were you talking about?" I said, "Why?" He said, "All I could hear was this uproarious laughter." And apparently the whole floor had been listening to the laughter, wondering what on earth we were doing. And I thought, my goodness, I didn't go in with that intention. I didn't expect the meeting to go the way it did. It wasn't a meeting. It was a girly chat.
Yeah.
But it created such a bond with those women. So then, and of course, because I was I stood out, wherever I went, I'd get people going, "Hi." And I'd have to remember, "Oh, you want to say hi?" Because I wasn't 100% sure. So that was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And then a similar experience also in India. I was asked to meet with some of this particular company we were working with. They sponsored young girls coming from the villages to work. And I was a bit sort of floored by how I could help these incredibly brave young women whose fathers didn't want them to work, and etc. and so on. We were talking these stories and what they'd done and what I'd found. And then one of them told me something, and I went, "Oh, wait a minute." And upstairs, I had a colleague who was a Black American, whose daughter had just made it onto Broadway.
Wow. Okay.
And if she ever listens to this, you'll know exactly who she is. And I went, "Go and find her. Go and find her. I shouldn't be having this conversation. She should be having this conversation." So I drag her in, and I just said, "You've no prep. You've no idea why you're here. Tell your story." And she did. And it was amazing. And you could see these girls, their faces. This is the mum of somebody who's just made it onto Broadway.
Wow.
And I thought then that is the power of it. It's just the telling the story.
Yeah.
So you guys can do anything. And you've been given this wonderful opportunity. Yeah. And so how you connect it, and then there's just 2 silly examples, but I've been terribly lucky that I've had that opportunity to make those connections for people and have those conversations. And it just humanizes the relationship, again, back to that word.
But those are your influences, right? I mean, these are your change influences.
Yeah, they're spot on.
Into here. But for me, that's really looking now for who is it that's going to help influence this change, because I'm not going to be the right person, right?
Spot on. You're absolutely spot on. when I get back on a plane somewhere, who's left behind?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Who's the one who's going to be picking it up when I'm not around? That's a very good observation. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that.
And it's bringing it back again to getting into their mindset and getting them understanding why are we changing, and also trusting you.
Yeah.
So all of those things that we've been talking about throughout. So it's so important. Just moving the conversation on a little. Something I've observed working with you, Helen, is the caliber of the team that you have within the transformation, and how you've brought together. And we at Marlowe Consulting always like working in a blended team, and the team that you've blended together there has been quite exceptional. So, how do you go about pulling together a transformation team? What do you look for in your team members?
Well, first of all, I was very lucky that was one of the things I was given. I said, I want to choose my team, and I was given that permission. And so again, anybody starting a journey like this, do ask for that permission, because remember, I could pick my team. Oh, you will need that permission later.
Mm-hmm.
I think, so the first thing I always look for with anybody I hire is, do they have a sense of humour?
Great thing to hear.
Transformation is hard. You need it, don't you?
It's been the same since I was, in my 20s. I have to have a crack at when I go to work. I have to have a laugh.
I'm so with you, by the way.
So, and I've hired some people. People have gone, oh, why did you give that person the role? And my head of one of my sites in Costa Rica, the first question I got asked by the team, why did you hire him to be our leader? And I thought, he's standing there. This is quite a tricky question. So I said, I could give you all the CV, but you'll have read that. I said, do you know why? He said, because he made me roar with laughter through the interview. And he looked at me because I hadn't told him that. And the whole team immediately responded, because they thought, oh, and he's got a sense of humour as well. Oh, that's all right then. Because it was such a potential culture clash between the two groups. I said, no, he just made me burst out laughing. And they knew that I liked to crack and a joke. So that's one thing I always look for. Somebody who under pressure, you can just make them laugh, or they can make you laugh. And that you'll have seen that in our meetings, how important the humour is for me. So that's one key thing. The second thing is, I do look for people who are not too linear about their way of thinking about their own personal careers and developments. Mm-hmm. And, it doesn't take too much to see my career has not been very linear. And I've sort of found a door and gone, oh, that looks interesting. Should we go through there? And that was explained to me after about 20 years of career, that you just open a door and you go, oh, that looks interesting. Follow
they call it squiggly careers now.
Oh, do they?
I think that's a new term.
Oh, my university flatmate still says to me, have you ever had a plan?
I've never had a plan.
Oh gosh, I always hated, and going to interviews, especially when you're in your 20s. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
No idea.
I haven't a clue.
Yeah,
see where it all takes me. But
yes, exactly. But then that's probably why we're all interested in change and transformation, ladies,
exactly.
if I may suggest.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I think that's one thing, is people who are prepared to take a little bit of a risk to learn. That would be one thing I want, because I want to everyone's going to be slightly out of their comfort zone into these roles, doesn't matter what the role is. Mm-hmm. So they're going to have to feel comfortable feeling a bit uncomfortable for a while. I think that the other thing, I've used the word before, but to me it's passionately important, is curiosity. So don't finish asking the question when you've been through your list, but there's probably another question you forgot to ask and another question you should have asked. Keep that conversation going, because that's how you'll learn most. And, and to your point around going out and listening, one of the things we did in the first 6 months of this program, we called it the discover phase, which sounds frightfully poncy, but actually what it was just everyone going out and learning, what the hell did this technology do? What the hell do we do today? And I told everybody, you will arrive and go through imposter syndrome, because you'll sit there and go, can't do this. And I said, the question you have to all ask yourselves is, if not me, then who? And that'll get you straight out, because you'll know you're the best around and you'll be back in the chair. But I said the imposter syndrome will go like this, because you'll keep discovering, you'll keep learning. And that's I need you doing that because you need to be curious, others will trip over something we've missed. And it's that sort of behaviour that I look for. So the curiosity, the humour, and then
and I can really see that in the
risk.
team. And you say that about that phase last year. And I remember how challenging a lot of them found it, because many of the team have come out of operational roles, the AstraZeneca team, come out of operational roles into this transformation programme. And it's a huge leap to go from a role which is incredibly challenging to run a huge set of operations, but far less ambiguous than going into a large transformation program. And frankly, what we're trying to do at the moment is probably one of the biggest in the world right now, and I think far more ambitious. And I think a lot of the people, even within the program, realise, because they haven't got that ability to compare with what other organisations are doing. And part of that challenge as well has been moving from a very hierarchical organisation into what really necessarily in a transformation program is more matrixed and more about influence rather than direct control. And how have you found that in the program, and how have your team adapted to that?
So, yeah, and you're absolutely spot on with everything you say. And people are still going through that journey, and we all do. It's not just team members. I'm the same, and the audit committee are the same. We all learn at every exchange. I think it comes down to credibility. So the other factor perhaps I should have raised is when I'm picking my team, I pick people who are valued by their peers and who are credible. So the first question a lot of my team were asked was, you're doing that? Why are you taking that job?
Yes.
Including me, by the way. I had people phoning me, oh my goodness, you're mad. Do you have any idea what you're taking on? No, but I'm sure you're about to help me understand. So there's a kind of a sense of credibility from where you come from. So when you go back and you talk, people do listen for a while at least.
Yeah.
The second thing I did was I insisted that all of my leaders remained on their old leadership teams. So they didn't get cut off and moved away. They stayed. 2 reasons. Because that communication, that bond has to be the strength that drives this transformation through. So it keeps their foot in the other camp and makes them feel part of their old team, which is important for their own personal motivation. But also it means we've got direct access, and they're used to seeing this person sitting there representing the program, which we've called Axial, so representing the Axial program. So that was the second key thing for me to enable that corridor back. And you could call it an escape route when they originally started, if you like. That was
I think that
was in my mind,
Yeah.
but we never described it like that. But it allowed them to feel as though they weren't being cut off.
Well, I know I'm just reflecting back on a couple of things that you've said that actually relate to all that now, which is that sense of, and I know, from being in transformation myself, that if you knew half of what you might have to do, you probably would never have done it, right? I certainly wouldn't have done West One, I can assure you, if I'd known what I was taking on. But that sense of, and I think now when we look at where we're going with technology, particularly at the moment in the world, and how fast we are having to change, that there aren't the examples of what people have done before, right? So we won't necessarily know when we start off on a road now where we're going, because nobody's done it before, we haven't done it, and so that sense for me about, I love what you say about humour, because I actually think if we can't go to work and have some fun and a laugh, then actually there's no point going. But that camaraderie and also the lack of blame, because we don't know. So no, the sort of sense of, well, we're learning. And I saw a quote recently where, a project had failed really badly, but nobody came out in the press and said that it failed. What they actually said was, gosh, we've learned a lot. Wow, we're going to know exactly what to do right next time. That's fantastic. So I thought that was a very interesting phrase.
That was the rocket that exploded.
It was the rocket, yeah. And it was actually Elon Musk. I didn't know who it was. I was going to, we'll decide whether to keep that in. But no, but seriously, whether you like the man or not, I do genuinely think to be able to look at something of that magnitude, God only knows what that pilot cost. But yet nobody got the blame for that publicly. I don't know what, I'm sure maybe if something went on behind closed doors, we don't know. But that sense of we learned, we move on, we take it to the next thing. I actually think Richard Branson's been particularly good at that as well.
Yes, very
good at that. You know, it's always, he is a role model in that. And
I agree.
I love him because he's a dyslexic thinker and I'm dyslexic. So that thinking, again, just the segue back to what you said before, having that team with different thinkers, different visuals, different way of seeing a challenge, I think is really important.
That's critical. Joining dots that others can't see means you don't miss the dot. And that's, you know, something that I pride myself in, but I know I can only join the dots I've ever got visibility of. I need everyone else doing the same. You're absolutely right.
And can I ask you one thing, just leading on from Annette's question about the matrix management? Because I think one of the big challenges for perhaps our listeners listening into this podcast is we get that they sit within their team. That's great. They're still with their mates or where they feel comfortable, or as you say, I love the word, an escape route. But they're working for you. The pressure's on. It's really tough. And actually, you've got to move them somewhere. You've got to get them from A to D today, not just to B or C. You've actually got to get them to D. How do you do that? Because I think as somebody who has led matrix teams, I'm sure you have, Annette, over the years, that's a very difficult job because at the end of the day, you're not their line manager.
Well, I'm lucky I am. So I've insisted on that. So that is something. So everybody who's on the program directly reports for me. So I'm very much but I've, again, going back to setting things up for success, that was something I've learned through my career. And it's something that I'm very passionate about as we progress through the program, that I've always asked for resource to report and people to report locally to manage they can see every day. So there's a sense of loyalty, a sense of, you don't look so good today. You can check in that real time moment. But no, I'm lucky. They do work for me. And that helps.
Okay.
It goes back to that point. They needed the courage to make that step.
Yes.
And come and be reporting to me, not to their line manager. Particularly as I'm not going to be their future career path. Someone else will be. So we need to build that trust with their bosses as well. I think, you talk about moving people on. You're absolutely right. But I try as little as I can to point that out.
Okay.
In that, if I've got to the point where I'm telling them we need to go from A to D, then we've kind of lost a bit of momentum. I want them telling me we're moving from A to D, and are you okay with that? And because then when we do have that little loss of momentum, I can focus and deal with that. I'm not trying to drive the entire program. If I try and drive the entire program day in, day out, I will fail. I have to delegate that. I have to have people around me who I go, you're a senior leader in my organization that I happen to be part of. I trust you, delegate to you to get stuff done. You come to me when you have a problem. You come to me when you need me to push. Yeah. And it's rare that I have to intervene, but I do. And that's when things have gone into a silo or things haven't quite gelled or people are disagreeing. And I put on, as I described, in fact, got my suit today, my pale blue beret for the UN. And I go in and mediate. And sometimes I need to do that, but not often. Not often.
We touched on your career, Helen, which has, as you say, not been linear. And where do you think how do you think that's benefited you in terms of being a leader of transformation? And what are some of the skills that you've picked up through the squiggly career that you've had that maybe others could learn from and think, well, those are things I need to pick up if that's where I want to head?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'd like to say I planned it that way, but of course I didn't. But I do try and encourage. I'm fortunate to have a lot of younger people who I know through private life and through my sons. And I always try and encourage them not to be too linear in their thinking, because if you are, you miss opportunities that may come your way. I think if I look at the various bits that I've learned, I'm glad I have a qualification that I could fall back on. So it gave me that sense of confidence that if worst comes to the worst, I can go back and be an accountant. And that's not a knock against an accountant. I still describe myself as an accountant. But it was a step for me that meant that I had that, particularly as a woman, who one day wanted to have family. I wanted that career.
And dare I say it, of a generation at the time, because I think,
Oh, absolutely.
We probably came from a slightly different generation.
No, I went to work and had to wear a skirt and
me
heels.
Too. I had to put my hair up.
Yeah, we weren't allowed to wear trousers. So yes, absolutely, absolutely. So I was glad I had that. So if in doubt, I'd say find something that you can qualify in that you could go back to. So that was a foundation for me, I suppose. So if I then think about other elements, I really am glad that I spent some time in an industry that's as fast moving, as tough as the retail industry and FMCG. That is when you learn the value of a dollar.
Yeah.
That is when you learn the value of pace. That's when you learn what a customer really, really is. So we talk about it in all the other industries, but trust me, if you've not been out on a store on a Saturday morning.
So I'm a 7-year M&S girl.
Well,
youth training scheme.
I would so recommend
youth training scheme. I was the first year.
Phenomenal. I would recommend anybody did things
Retail
like that.
Army, I called it.
Yeah. I mean, sadly, not many of them run them anymore. But no. So for me, that was an extraordinary experience. It's exhausting working in retail. Anybody who stays in retail, you have my complete respect. It is really hard yards. After that, you've never, ever worked hard because you're not in retail anymore. So that was one thing I think I learned. I think the second thing, I really enjoyed being a consultant for a bit because that teaches you consulting skills. That teaches you how to tell a story well. I mean, retail helped with that. I've got 20 seconds to communicate. I ran all the store promotions and all the point of sale in the store. So I had 20 seconds as a woman was walking by, typically a woman, to communicate what the store had for them. So the sharpness of the message. But that consulting really honed that. And I had a couple of people there who really taught me how to tell a story. And then from that, I was really fortunate that when I joined AstraZeneca, I thought I'd last 3 years, probably, because I'd go on to the next thing. And here I am, nearly 21 years later, unbelievably. But I've had something like 15 jobs in that time.
Yeah.
And that's where the open door comes. So I've been offered, I don't think I've applied for one of those jobs after the first one. The rest of people have said, would you go and do that? Would you like to consider doing that? And I don't think I've ever said no, apart from one area, because I didn't want to be a country president and people didn't understand that. And that's just, I felt though that was a different skill set that I valued. I knew what I thought good looked like and I didn't want to be that. And so that was a decision. That was the only real decision I made. But one of the things I really learned was I ended up spending quite some time because I was asked in internal audit and compliance, and people go, oh, that's an interesting part of your career. What else have you done? Trust me, the skills you learn if you spend a couple of years going out and evaluating what others are doing, tact, diplomacy, speaking truth to power, understanding how easy it is to get the wrong side of the line, the criticality of training our managers outside their own cultural norms, because they don't understand how others may perceive their behaviour. All of those, the ability to set something up from scratch, which I did for the audit committee, our commercial ethics department. That was really at a time when everybody was in the headlines as a pharmaceutical industry. Those skills I never forget, because it really made me stop. Because I had to go in, spend 2-3 weeks on a site and give an opinion. And that opinion could determine that person's career. That's something you learn very quickly.
Yeah.
And what you can't do is go in and argue over every point. You've got to go in and understand and then finish. And that was where I learned all of those skills. They were incredible. And then obviously I've been lucky to do marketing and other things.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Well, I honestly think we could carry on, but we are out of time. But I would really, honestly, Helen, I feel like I could talk to you and Annette for so much longer on this.
Oh, bless you.
But lots of parallels, I think.
Yes,
we've got in
absolutely.
the three of us, which is lovely. Can I thank you once again? This is a big outing for Women in Change, and we're absolutely delighted and thrilled that you've been able to join us here today and share a lot of wisdom. I'm going to reflect for the end of this podcast on the things that I've taken away. But thank you very much for your time, because I know that you're incredibly busy. So
it's
thank you for everything.
Pleasure, and I really appreciate the invitation.
Not at all. Hopefully we'll have you back.
I'd be happy.
Thanks, Annette.
No problem. Thank you, Lou, for organising it all, and thanks from me as well, Helen.
Pleasure.
So we want to reflect back, don't we, on what Helen said. And I think there's quite a few coming out for me. What are you thinking? What were you thinking when she talked about the why? How many times do we hear about vision, the why? Why are we doing this? Why do you need to know? Why are you coming with me on this journey? How will this make you think? How will this make you feel? I think the why is one of the most important things for any transformational program, yet it's the thing we forget the most. The storytelling, that was the second thing she said for me. How do you build the vision? How do you tell the story? How do you connect? How do you make sure that you are really bringing those people with you? As somebody who's worked in broadcast for over 25 years, I know it takes at least 6 times for somebody to hear the first thing. Why do we just assume when we're doing transformational programs that everyone will get it on the first piece of communications? And just because you know it doesn't mean everybody else does. Where are they? Where have they come from? How many times have they heard it? Have a think about that. I think the whole listening bit and thinking about where people have come from is really important. The next thing I thought was the empathy. How much time do we think about empathy? I know since COVID, we've had to be much more empathetic leaders. We've had to really reflect on our leadership style, where we meet people. And I loved what she said about humour. My goodness me, if we're not having fun, if we're not able to work under pressure well together, make each other laugh, really, really bond, I think humour was a wonderful thing. And I love that she brought that into the conversation. And then lastly, my last lesson, have a plan B, have something to fall back on. The squiggly career, certainly my career has certainly been a squiggly career. There's no roadmap to my journey in life, that's for sure. Every door that you push on, does it open? Where does it take you? Love that analogy, love that metaphor. So it's a tough world out there in the world of transformation, but I think Helen has summed up a few things really, really neatly. Know your why. Think why you're going to do this. Who needs to be part of it? And remember, stakeholders are not a straitjacket. Remind them where they are, where they've got to go. Repeat, repeat, repeat. And make sure you do it with humour and tell the right story. Until our next podcast, I'd like to thank you for listening. And if you want to find out more about Women in Change, just pop over to womeninchange.co.uk, or you can find the LinkedIn page, just Women in Change.